and welcome back to Into the Massiverse. This is episode 7, where we are going to be discussing Tower of Dawn, the 7th book in the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J Maas. Before we get started, one single note: I am wearing gloves today because it is currently 5 degrees Celsius and there's no heating out here where I record. So if you see these and you think, what on earth's going on? There's the answer straight off the bat. My hands hurt when they get cold, so I am keeping the gloves on during this recording session. Now, Tower of Dawn is a controversial book in the Throne of Glass series because it takes place at the exact same time Empire of Storms is happening. So when you read the books in order, you do have to jump back in time for Tower of Dawn. It delays progressing forward with the narrative. And it focuses on Chaol, who many people are not fans of. It's a book that many people try to tandem read with Empire of Storms, where you read certain chapters of one book, then certain chapters of the other, so that you progress through the story in a chronological sense. But for a first read through, I never recommend that anyone does that. And I'm just a fan of reading the series the way Sarah J Maas intended, hence why I'm such a firm advocate for reading Assassin's Blade in third position and reading all of Empire of Storms before starting Tower of Dawn. Very much like Assassin's Blade, Tower of Dawn is a pause from the main narrative, and it contains a ton of contextual information that completely revolutionizes your understanding of what's going on into the rest of the series / the final book. You could say that even though Assassin's Blade and Tower of Dawn aren't most people's favorite books, they are two of the most important books in the entire series, purely from what you find out whilst reading them. Bearing that in mind, let's dive straight in. Discuss book number 7 in the Throne of Glass series, the penultimate one, second to last, Tower of Dawn, and delve even further into the Massiverse. As I've already said, Tower of Dawn follows Chaol over the same time period that we followed all the other characters in Empire of Storms. So cast your minds back to the end of Queen of Shadows, and you'll remember Chaol has just been paralyzed and is being sent to the southern continent to act as Dorian's hand and Aelin's ambassador for Terrasen, with 2 main goals in mind. The first, to heal his injury, and the second, to win the support of the southern continent in the upcoming war against Erewhon and his evil forces. AKA, poor Chaol's got a lot to achieve, and neither of these asks are easy. We would like you to go away on holiday and come back not paralyzed and with an army. Luckily for Chaol, his right-hand woman, Nesryn, goes with him to the southern continent. And just as an FYI, Chaol may find achieving one of his goals totally fine, but the second he would not have achieved without Nesryn. Nesryn is a girl boss. Not enough people give Nesryn the love she deserves. She is an absolute girl boss. She is one of the best characters in this series. I do think it's just one of those things that happens, though, when so many of the characters are amazing. Others tend to fall by the wayside, and the fact that that happens to Nesryn is a travesty because she is brilliant. Rant over. This book begins with Chaol and Nesryn arriving in Antica, this seaside city on the southern continent. And when they arrive in the city, there are white sheets everywhere, which in the cultural context of the southern continent means that someone has passed away. The two of them head to the Kargan's palace, and Nesryn expresses how excited she is because her family are from Antica. Her dad grew up there. She has aunts and uncles and cousins locally that she's never had the chance to meet before. So while Chaol is working on healing, she is going to get the chance to meet some family members she's never seen before. In the Kagan's palace, Chaol presents the Kagan with a ton of gold and jewels that Aelin has sent him with, and the Kagan stops him dead and says, I've heard a lot about your Aelin Galathinius because I have spies over on your continent, and I don't like what I've heard about her. So no matter how much you sweet talk, no matter how many bribes you bring with you, there is no way I am getting involved in this war. I do not like your queen. And so Chaol's a little bit taken aback. He's like, oh, that's not good for mission 2 of my trip here. But it's quite clear that Chaol has a legitimate reason for being on the southern continent. Man is literally in a wheelchair. So the Kagan says, look, you can stay by all means and receive healing from the super duper famous Torre Sesme. The healers there are amazing. They're going to be able to sort out your back. But as an FYI, the politics are not politicking. You are here as like a special honored guest of the country to get your back fixed. Line drawn in the sand right here, right now on day one. We find out from one of the princes, Sartak. Oh my God, who I love so much. Honestly, Sartak FTW. That the person who's passed away is his sister, Tumalun, and that the Kagan is currently grieving the loss of one of his 6 children. The Kagan tells Kale and Nezrin that Rifthold has actually been sacked, which we know has happened from the Wyvern attack. That Banon, Asterin, Dorian, Rowan, they're all present for. But Kale gets no further information, so he's just incredibly worried about Dorian. And Nezrin is incredibly worried about her family. And the Kagan kind of lets them go on that super duper cheerful note. The eldest of the princes, Kashin, takes Kale and Nezrin from the chamber, and he shares that he doesn't believe his sister Tumalun committed suicide. He thinks something else is going on. And we find out that within the southern continent, there is no definitive line of succession. There is no guaranteed, this is the crown prince, he is my heir kind of situation like there is over in a nation like Ardalan. The princes and princesses basically have to be competing their whole lives for who will be crowned and selected next Kagan, which creates a really interesting political climate that Kale and Nezrin have entered themselves into. While there may be a lot less high octane drama in the first section of this book, the politics are politicking so well. We then find out that our homegirl, Irene Towers, who we met all the way back in Assassin's Blade, is here in Antica, and she's only gone and become the best student at the Torre Sesme. Girl hasn't just gone to med school. Girl's absolutely owning med school. She's let the woman in charge, Hafiza, know that she wants to head back to Ardalan because war is coming and she wants to be able to heal anybody injured. If you remember, Irene had fled Ardalan because her mother and the rest of her family were killed by the king of Ardalan because her mother wielded healing magic. Now that magic's returned to the nation and the king's dead, she would like to return home and help heal anybody affected by the upcoming war effort. Hafiza's not loving this plan because in many ways Irene is becoming her heir apparent at the tower. So Hafiza says, look, before you go, we have a special guest, a special patient for the tower, for the Torre Sesme, and I would like you to be in charge of looking after him. He's a special guest of the Kagan, he's really important, and his injury is really bad. It's going to be a very difficult case to take on. So Irene knows this is really going to delay her departure for a decent chunk of time, but Homegirl can't really refuse. Hafiza is kind of her boss. So Irene, at the bare minimum, agrees to assess him and see how he is. When she turns up to assess Kale's injury, she is awful. She is rude, mainly because he has worked for the King of Ardalan. He served the man that killed her mother. And she leaves saying, I'll let you know when I've made a decision whether I'm going to heal you or not. Afterwards, she feels terrible. She talks to Hafiza about it and is like, do you know what, in hindsight, that young man, that rather handsome and attractive young man, he was really polite. He was really nice. And I was a total bitch to him. So Hafiza kind of admonishes her and is like, do better next time, Irene. That's all you can do. But Hafiza's made it clear that she thinks helping heal someone like Kale, who has worked for the King of Ardalan, it's going to help heal something inside of Irene. It's going to help her move past her anger about what happened to her mother. The two of them discuss Kale's injury, and it turns out the dark magic that the King of Ardalan hit Kale with, it's going to be super tricky to heal. Like, even someone as talented as Irene admits this is going to be a real toughie to work on. Meanwhile, Nezrin's gone off and visited her family. She's enjoying her holiday, and when she heads out to find them for the first time, guess who offers to help her along her way? To be a little bit of a guide. Prince Sartak. Homegirl deserves a prince. I don't know if I've made it explicitly clear, but Nezrin used to date Kale before Selena entered the picture. So Nezrin has seen him get with Selena and had to be cool with it. And now they're in another continent and an actual real life prince is interested in her. It's such a glow up. Meanwhile, Kale is spending time with one of the other princes. We've met Kashim, we've met Sartak, this third brother. He's called Argan. And Argan is like the spy master. So Kale grabs him and's like, hey, what else do you know about what's going on in Rifthold? Kale wants to find out if anyone knows if Dorian's alive or not. Because if Dorian's dead, Kale might have a mental breakdown and lose the will to live. Because they're soulmates, they're bestest friends, they're bros. But Argan ain't sharing shit, and Kale is pissed because Argan obviously knows more than he's letting on, and he just won't share with Kale, which is really unfair and just not very nice. Nezrin and Kale have a standing invite to have dinner with the royal family every evening, but Irene comes as a guest. And she's really off with both Kale and Prince Cashin. And from the discussion that happens at dinner, Kale can totally tell that Cashin is hella into Irene. Cashin basically tries to tell Kale to back off Irene's mind. And Kale's like, interesting dynamic at play right here. Fun fact, Nezrin doesn't go to the dinner. When she comes back that evening, Kale is like, where the hell were you? Why didn't you tell me where you'd gone? And she was like, mate, it's obviously in my family. It's not my fault that all you care about is you and you're so focused on what's happening with you. You didn't even notice that I've been gone for like hours with my family. It's just having dinner with them. Build a bridge and get over it, dude. In case you can't tell, I'm like massively Team Nezrin. In whatever happens, I'm massively Team Nezrin. Aggressively Team Nezrin. If Nezrin has 100 stands, I'm one of them. If Nezrin has one stand, that's me. If Nezrin has no stands at all, it's because I'm dead. Justice for Nezrin, guys. Why do more people not talk about her? I'll tell you why. Racism. Irene decides that she is going to take on the job of healing Kale, partially because she feels bad about how rude she was to him during their first meeting. During their first proper session, she gives him a heads up, look, you gotta watch what you say when you're in the palace, okay? Everyone is snidey, listening in. Bear that in mind. If you and Nezrin are chatting about stuff, keep it on the DL, man. There are eyes and ears everywhere here in Antica. And Kale's like, damn, good to know. They talk about the differences between Antica and Ardalan, and Kale really stresses to her everything that is to come with Duke Parrington and all of the badness that's heading their way. If you remember, all the stuff we've learned in Empire of Storms, Kale knows none of it. Kale's latest information literally comes from the post-fight scenes at the end of Queen of Shadows. So he knows that Erewhon is Duke Parrington and that there is some evil plan at play, but he doesn't know any specifics. And he sure as shit doesn't know where the weird keys are. Irene's healing him at the time, but she says, hey, what I'll do tonight when I go back to the Torre Sesme, I'll have a nosy around the library and see if I can find anything out about these Valg creatures. She also gets the opportunity to make clear to him that treatment at the Torre Sesme is totally free. And Kale reacts like every American who has ever visited Britain tends to, and freaks out like, oh my God, free healthcare. This is insane. And I loved that. Irene's like, of course it's free. You're hurt. I probably shouldn't find that as funny as I do, but I do. Hale tries to organize a meeting with the Kagan, and the Kagan simply replies, yeah, I'm not taking any private meetings. Me and my wife, we are grieving the death of our daughter. STFU. Go away. Stop bothering me. So while Kale has made traction on mission 1, mission 2, it's still dead in the water, apparently. While Irene does in fact find a book in the library about Valg. But we have a very unfortunate situation where she starts feeling like she's being watched. So Homegirl leaves the library, heads back to the dorms, and on her way home, notices that another girl's been murdered. She finds her mutilated body, and the first thing that crosses Irene's mind is, Earlier on, I felt like I was being watched, and this girl, who is now dead, she looks an awful lot like me. And as she is computing that, she hears someone coming up behind her, so Homegirl has to leg it. Oh, it's so creepy. It's giving young woman alone at night in an alleyway vibes. Run, bitch, run! The next morning, she goes to see Kale and is late for their session. She is looking hella rough, and she tells Kale exactly what happened. And he says, "Oh my goodness, that sounds like a Valg attack. There is now a Valg here in Antica." He apologizes to her. He's like, "Oh my God, we must have brought a Valg demon with us as we traveled here." But as the two of them talk, they kind of think, what if there were already Valg here on the southern continent? What if the recent death of Princess Tumaloon wasn't a suicide at all? What if there is some Valg shiz going on? So Kale warns Irene to be as careful as she can be. And Irene responds by saying, "Well, Kale, you work in the military. Would you please come and help me teach the rest of the young women who work at the Torre Sesame some basic self-defense elements?" And he brings up the valid point. I can't walk. How are you going to get me here from like the palace guest quarters over to the Torre Sesame? And she's like, "Babe, I've got your back. You, you're nothing special here in Antigua. I have healed many wheelchair users in the past, and I have a contraption handy that'll help get you on the back of a horse. I can help you ride over." And he is gagged. Irene lets Kale know that she thinks she's figured out what she needs to do in order to heal his spine and lets him know it's going to be incredibly painful. And Kale says, "Hey, look, I can take pain. The end result will be worth it." And she also admits that there is perhaps a potential emotional trauma element that he's going to have to address and overcome. And Kale's like, "Look, my trauma, none of your business." We're kind of going, oh, are we in Tower of Dawn going to get a little bit more understanding about why Kale always acts like he's got a stick up his bottom? And the answer is yes, we are.